lion's cry for help revealed a lioness struggling to give birth, but what happened next is chilling. If you're enjoying this incredible true story of wildlife courage and compassion, don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing wildlife encounters. The rising sun painted the savanna in hues of amber and gold as James Makori steered his weathered Land Rover along the dusty patrol route of Amboseli National Park. 15 years as a senior ranger had taught him to read the landscape like a book. The subtle indentations in the grass that told of a predator's passage. The distant movements of the elephant herds against the backdrop of Mount Kilimanjaro. The unusual silence of birds that often signaled danger. But nothing in those years had prepared him for what he would witness that day. The morning had begun like countless others. James had risen before dawn, kissed his sleeping wife goodbye, and driven the 40 minutes from their modest home on the outskirts of the park to the ranger station. The cool morning air carried the distinct scent of wild sage and dust as he sipped his thermos coffee and reviewed. The night reports poaching activity spotted near the eastern boundary. A tourist vehicle that had veered off the designated paths. A small brush fire that had been quickly contained. Routine concerns that formed the rhythm of his days protecting one of Kenya's most precious wildlife sanctuaries. "I'll take the northern sector today," he told his colleague Esther, who nodded as she plotted coordinates on their weathered map. There were reports of some unusual lion movements near the acacia groves. "Be careful out there," she replied, not looking up from her work. "The drought has made everyone desperate, animals and humans alike. If this story is capturing your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more incredible wildlife content." James nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. 4 months without proper rain had transformed parts of the lush savanna into brittle, barren stretches. Animals were venturing closer to human settlements in search of water, creating dangerous tensions with local communities. The lions in particular had been showing signs of stress and unusual territorial behaviors, increased aggression, desperate hunting patterns. As he drove along the northern boundary, James kept his keen eyes scanning the horizon. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from other rangers, but the morning passed uneventfully. He stopped briefly at a watering hole to document the gathering of zebras and wildebeests, their numbers thinner than usual for this time of year. The drought was taking its toll, and his notebook filled with concerning observations that would later inform the park's conservation strategies. It was just past noon, with the African sun beating mercilessly overhead, when James decided to take a different route back to the station, a small detour through the acacia woodland where several lion prides were known to shelter during the hottest hours of the day. The Land Rover bumped along the uneven terrain, its familiar mechanical groans a comfort in the vast wilderness. He was rounding a bend in the dirt track when he saw it, a sight so unexpected that he instinctively slammed on the brakes, sending a cloud of dust billowing around the vehicle. A male lion stood directly in the middle of the path. Don't forget to comment below if you've ever seen wild lions in their natural habitat. This was not the unusual part. Rangers encountered lions frequently in their daily patrols. What froze James in his seat was the lion's behavior. The massive creature wasn't slinking away as would be expected. It wasn't displaying aggression or territorial posturing. Instead, it was staring directly at the Land Rover with an intensity that seemed almost deliberate. "What are you doing, big fellow?" James murmured, keeping the engine idling as he assessed the situation. The Lioness, magnificent male with a full dark mane that marked him as a mature adult in his prime, took several steps toward the vehicle, then stopped. He let out a low, rumbling growl that wasn't threatening but seemed almost communicative. Then, most surprisingly, the lion turned and walked several paces away, stopped and looked back at James with what could only be described as expectation. Drawing on his extensive experience with wildlife behavior, James knew immediately that something was very wrong. This was not normal lion behavior. In his 15 years as a ranger, he had never seen anything like it. Lions generally avoided human contact unless threatened or desperate. This lion seemed neither. It seemed purposeful. The lion repeated the sequence, a few steps away, then looking back at the vehicle. When James didn't move, the creature let out a more insistent growl and paced with evident agitation. "He wants me to follow him," James whispered to himself, hardly believing his own conclusion. It defied everything he knew about wildlife behavior, yet the lion's actions left little room for alternative interpretation. If you're amazed by this incredible animal intelligence, smash that like button right now. James radioed the ranger station. "This is Makori in Sector 7. I've encountered an adult male lion displaying unusual behavior. I believe he may be trying to lead me somewhere." The radio crackled with Esther's concerned voice. "James, do not follow the line. Wait for backup. I'll send Thomas and Kyoko your way immediately." But James felt a profound urgency in the lion's behavior that he couldn't ignore. I'm going to maintain a safe distance in the vehicle, but I need to see what's happening. This isn't aggression, something's wrong. Against protocol, but following his instincts honed through years in the field. James slowly engaged the gear and began to follow the lion, maintaining a respectful distance of about 30 meters. The lion immediately turned and began moving with purpose through the acacia woodland, occasionally looking back as if to ensure James was still following. The bizarre procession continued for nearly 2 kilometers, moving deeper into the woodland where the acacias grew more densely. The lion led him away from the established tracks into areas rarely visited even by rangers. James marked their route carefully on his GPS, knowing that his decision to follow would require detailed explanation later. Finally, the lion stopped at the edge of a small clearing and let out a deep, resonant roar that seemed to carry both urgency and distress. James cautiously brought the Land Rover to a halt and reached for his binoculars. What he saw through the lenses made his breath catch. In the dappled shade of a large acacia tree lay a lioness in obvious distress. Even from this distance, James could see she was pregnant and appeared to be in labor. Her sides heaved with labored breathing, and she occasionally lifted her head to let out low moans of pain before collapsing back onto the ground. Around her, the grass was matted with blood. "Oh my God," James breathed, immediately understanding the male lion's unprecedented behavior. The lioness was experiencing a difficult birth, potentially a life-threatening complication, and somehow, against all rational explanation, the male had sought human help. If this incredible moment of animal trust is touching your heart, please subscribe now for more amazing wildlife stories. James had encountered many birth complications in wildlife during his career. It was an unfortunate reality of nature. The protocol was clear. Non-intervention was the standard approach to allow natural processes to unfold. But in cases where human activity or conservation concerns were factors, veterinary intervention could be authorized. With lion populations decreasing across Kenya due to habitat loss and conflict with humans, every lion life was precious to the conservation effort. He radioed the station again, this time with urgency. "This is Makori. I need the veterinary team immediately. I have a lioness in labor with what appears to be serious complications." The male led me directly to her. "I believe she may die without intervention." "Copy that," came the response. "Dr. Njeri is on site today. Sending her your coordinates now." ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity as James watched the lioness struggle. The male lion had settled about 10 meters from her, his eyes shifting between his mate and the Land Rover as if imploring James to do something. The intelligence and awareness in that gaze challenged everything James thought he knew about these creatures he had spent his life protecting. Unable to simply wait, James made a decision. He was trained in basic wildlife first aid for emergencies, not veterinary procedures, but enough to potentially help until Dr. Njeri arrived. Moving with deliberate slowness, he retrieved the emergency medical kit from the back of the Land Rover and his tranquilizer rifle, which he loaded with a dart containing a mild sedative. The male lion watched his movements intently but made no aggressive moves. It was as if a fragile understanding had formed between man and beast, united by concern for the suffering lioness. "I'm going to try to help her," James said softly to the male lion, knowing the animal couldn't understand his words but somehow feeling the need to communicate his intentions. "I need you to stay calm. Don't forget to like and comment if you're on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next." With extreme caution, tranquilizer rifle ready, James approached the lioness. The male lion rose to his feet and James froze, his heart pounding. But instead of charging, the lion merely watched, muscles tense but showing no aggression. It was a moment of trust so profound that James would later struggle to describe it to his colleagues. As he drew closer to the lioness, the severity of her situation became clearer. She was young, probably experiencing her first pregnancy. Her golden eyes, clouded with pain, tracked him weakly. A partially emerged cub was visible, but the birth had stalled a dystocia, or difficult birth, which could be fatal for both mother and cubs without assistance. Dr. Layla Njeri arrived in a cloud of dust exactly 17 minutes after James's call. The park's lead wildlife veterinarian for the past 8 years. She was renowned for her expertise with big cats and her unflappable demeanor in crisis situations. Today, both qualities would be tested to their limits. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of wildlife medicine," she said as she quickly assessed the situation, taking in the male lion's unusual behavior and the critical condition of the lioness. "You're telling me the male actually led you here?" "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't experienced it myself," James replied, helping her unload her equipment. He stood in the road, got my attention, and deliberately led me to her. Dr. Endry shook her head in amazement, but quickly focused on the task at hand. We need to sedate her immediately. She's exhausted and in severe distress. That cub is malpositioned. That's why she can't deliver. With practiced efficiency, they prepared for the emergency procedure. Dr. Jerry administered the sedative while James stood guard, constantly monitoring the male lion, who remained at his post, watchful but allowing them to work. Once the sedative took effect, Dr. Jerry worked quickly, her hands steady as she manipulated the malpositioned cub and gently guided it into the world. "One down," she said, passing the tiny, wet bundle to James. "There are more. I can feel at least 2 more dots." Single quotes. James cradled the newborn cub, using gauze to gently clean its airways. The tiny creature, eyes still sealed shut, squirmed weakly in his hands. Alive, but barely. He placed it in the heated portable incubator they had brought from the vehicle. If you're touched by this incredible rescue, please hit that subscribe button now. The next 20 minutes were a blur of intense concentration as Dr. Endry skillfully delivered 2 more cubs, both alive but worryingly small and weak. The mother, though sedated, was dangerously depleted, her vital signs flickering alarmingly on the portable monitor. "She's hemorrhaging, Doctor," Jerry said, her voice tight with concern. "I need to administer oxytocin to contract the uterus and stop the bleeding. We might lose her if we can't get this under control." As they fought to save the lioness, the male lion began to pace, sensing the gravity of the situation. His rumbling growls conveyed his distress, yet remarkably, he continued to allow the humans to work, as if understanding that they offered his mate's only chance of survival. "Talk to him, James," Dr. Jerry said without looking up from her work. "Keep him calm. We'll need a few more minutes." James turned to the magnificent animal, speaking in a low, steady voice that carried across the clearing. "We're trying to help her. She's fighting hard. Your cubs are alive." Whether it was his tone or some deeper understanding, the lion settled, his amber eyes fixed on James with an intensity that penetrated to his soul. Finally, Dr. Jerry sat back on her heels, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "I've done everything I can. The bleeding has slowed, but she's very weak. The next few hours will be critical." They moved the 3 cubs close to their mother, allowing them to nuzzle against her even in her sedated state, knowing the importance of the early bonding period. The male lion had edged closer, his massive body tense with concern. "We should back off now, Doctor," Jerry said, packing her equipment. "Let them have some space. The sedative will wear off soon." They retreated to their vehicles but remained at the scene, unwilling to abandon the family in this precarious moment. James radioed for a second team to bring additional supplies. They would need to monitor the situation overnight. As the African sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the savanna in deep oranges and purples, they watched the lioness begin to stir. The male immediately went to her side, gently nuzzling her face with a tenderness that belied his ferocious appearance. She responded weakly, her eyes fluttering open. If this beautiful moment of animal love is touching your heart, please like and share this video with someone who appreciates wildlife as much as you do. "Look," James whispered, pointing. The lioness had turned her attention to the cubs, weakly drawing them closer with her paw. One by one, the tiny creatures found their way to her teats and began to nurse a promising sign that both mother and cubs might survive the night. The male lion settled beside his family, his massive body providing protection and warmth. But what happened next would forever change James's understanding of these magnificent animals. The lion rose once more and walked deliberately toward the Land Rover where James sat watching. He stopped about 5 meters away, his gaze unwavering. Then, in a gesture that seemed to defy explanation, the lion dipped his head low in what could only be described as a bow, before turning back to his family. "Did you see that?" James asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Endry nodded, equally stunned. "I did. In all my years. I've never... ... Words failed them both in the face of what they had witnessed, a moment of connection and communication across the vast divide of species that challenged everything they thought they knew about the consciousness of the creatures they had dedicated their lives to protecting. As darkness fell over the savannah, James and Dr. Jerry established a small observation camp at a respectful distance from the lion family. The stars emerged in brilliant clarity above them, the Milky Way a river of light across the African sky. They took turns monitoring the lions throughout the night, whispering updates into their radio for the anxious team back at headquarters. By morning, their vigilance was rewarded with an astonishing sight. The lioness was sitting up, still weak but alert, cleaning her cubs with dedicated attention. All 3 tiny lions had survived the night. The male remained a constant guardian, circling the family and occasionally bringing his mate small amounts of water by, soaking his mane in a nearby puddle and allowing her to lick the moisture, behavior rarely documented and further evidence of the complex bonds between these animals. Remember to subscribe if you want to see more incredible wildlife stories like this one. For the next 3 days, James and a rotating team of rangers maintained their vigil, documenting every aspect of this extraordinary situation. They observed the lioness growing stronger, the cubs becoming more active. The male continued his attentive care, eventually bringing a small gazelle he had hunted alone, a difficult feat without the usual cooperation of the pride, and sharing it with his recovering mate. On the morning of the 4th day, Dr. and Jerry declared that the immediate danger had passed. The lioness was recovering well, and all 3 cubs appeared to be thriving despite their difficult entry into the world. It was time to withdraw the human presence and allow the natural order to reassert itself. As they packed up their observation post, the male lion appeared once more at the edge of the clearing. He stood tall, his mane backlit by the rising sun, watching them with that same intense gaze that had first caught James's attention on the dusty road days earlier. "Thank you," James said softly, feeling no self-consciousness about addressing the animal directly after all they had shared. "Take care of him." As if in response, the lion let out a roar that echoed across the savannah, a threat, but a proclamation that seemed to contain all the wild majesty and mystery of Africa within its sound. Then he turned and disappeared into the golden grass to rejoin his family. The story of the lion who sought human help might have ended there. A remarkable anecdote to be shared among the ranger community and eventually fade into park legend. But what happened in the following months would send ripples through the wildlife conservation world and challenge fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness and the relationship between humans and the creatures with whom they share the planet. If you're enjoying this incredible true story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. James found himself drawn back to the acacia grove regularly, tracking the progress of the lion family from a distance. He documented the cubs' growth, their first tentative steps beyond the shelter of their birth site, their playful interactions under the watchful eyes of their parents. The male, whom James had started calling Mafalm, Swahili for king, seemed to recognize the ranger's vehicle whenever it appeared, often pausing to gaze in its direction with that same penetrating awareness. 6 weeks after the birth, James arrived for his regular observation to find something unusual. The lion family was not in their usual resting place. Concerned, he began a wider search pattern, worried that poachers might have targeted the distinctive male with his dark mane, or that the family had fallen victim to one of the many natural dangers of the savannah. He had nearly completed a full circuit of the territory when he spotted them, not hidden away as he had feared, but walking openly along the same dirt track where he had first encountered Mafalm. The male was leading, the lioness following, with the 3 cubs gambling around her feet, already showing the coordinated movements and bursts of playful aggression that would one day make them formidable hunters. James stopped the Land Rover at a respectful distance, expecting the family to melt away into the grass as wild lions typically would. Instead, Mafalm sat down directly in the center of the track, mirroring their first encounter. The lioness settled nearby, watching calmly as the cubs tumbled over each other in the dust. It was as if they were waiting for him. Heart pounding with the strangeness of it, James slowly exited the vehicle, something he would never normally do in such close proximity to wild lions, especially with cubs present. He stood beside the Land Rover, ready to retreat at the first sign of aggression. Mafalm rose and walked several paces toward him, then stopped. The cubs, curious about this strange 2-legged creature, made as if to approach, but their mother gently corralled them with her paw. The tableau held for a long moment, man and lions regarding each other across an ancient divide. Then Mafalm did something extraordinary. He turned his massive head toward his family, then back to James, and let out a soft, almost gentle roar. Unlike the territorial proclamations or hunting calls that rangers typically heard, it seemed almost like ... an introduction. If this incredible moment of animal trust and intelligence is amazing to you, please comment below with your thoughts. "Hello to you too," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're beautiful." As if satisfied with this exchange, Mafalme gathered his family with subtle movements and led them off the track and into the grass. Before disappearing, he turned one last time, meeting James's gaze in what felt like acknowledgement, one protector to another, before melting away into the golden landscape. James stood motionless long after they had gone, struggling to process what had just occurred. In his 15 years as a ranger, he had witnessed countless wonders: elephants mourning their dead, cheetahs teaching their young to hunt, the intricate social dynamics of baboon troops. But nothing had prepared him for this sense of deliberate communication, of connection across the species barrier. Back at the ranger station, he struggled to describe the encounter to his colleagues. It was like he wanted me to see that they were okay, he said, aware of how it sounded. Like he was ... thanking me. Some of the other rangers exchanged skeptical glances, but Dr. Jory, who had witnessed the extraordinary events of the birth, nodded slowly. "We know so little, really," she said. "Their emotional lives, their cognitive abilities, we've barely scratched the surface. The story might have remained a curious anecdote shared among the park staff, if not for what happened 3 months later. When a documentary film crew arrived at Amboseli to shoot footage for a series on African predators, James was assigned as their guide, his extensive knowledge of the local lion populations making him the natural choice. On their second day in the field, as they were setting up cameras near a watering hole frequented by various prides, a familiar dark-maned figure emerged from the grass less than 50 meters away. Mafalm had appeared seemingly out of nowhere with his now half-grown cubs in tow. The lioness was not with them, likely hunting elsewhere, as the pride had expanded to include 2 other females in recent weeks. "Cut the engines," James instructed the film crew urgently, "and whatever you do, stay in the vehicle." The documentary team, veterans of wildlife filming, obeyed instantly, their cameras swinging to capture the magnificent male and his offspring. They whispered excitedly among themselves, recognizing the rare opportunity to film lion cubs at relatively close range. What they could not have anticipated was what happened next. Rather than moving away from the human presence as wild lions typically would, Mafalm led his cubs in a deliberate path past the vehicles, close enough that the cameras could capture every detail of their magnificent features. He paused when they were parallel to James's Land Rover, meeting the ranger's gaze with that same intense awareness, before continuing unhurriedly toward the watering hole. Don't forget to subscribe to witness more amazing wildlife connections like this one. The film crew was ecstatic, believing they had simply experienced the good fortune that occasionally smiles on wildlife photographers. But James knew better. The encounter had been deliberate. Mafalm had chosen to present his family, to allow them to be documented. "That's the lion I told you about," he explained to the amazed film crew. "The one who sought help when his mate was in labor." Sophie Chun, the lead director, lowered her camera slowly. "Wait, this is the same lion from that story? I thought that was just a park legend." "No legend," James replied, watching as Mafalm supervised his cubs drinking at the water's edge, his vigilant gaze constantly scanning for threats. "I was there. He led me to her when she was in trouble. Doctor. And Jerry and I helped deliver those cubs you're filming now." The documentary team's focus immediately shifted. What had begun as standard footage for a general series on African predators suddenly had the potential to become something much more. Significant documentation of a level of animal intelligence and human-wildlife connection that challenged conventional understanding. Over the next 2 weeks, with James's guidance, they documented the Mafalm pride extensively, capturing remarkable footage of the lion's unusual behavior. Unlike other lions who typically avoided human presence, Mafalm seemed to recognize and even seek out James's vehicle. He would often pause in his activities when the ranger appeared, making direct eye contact in a way that felt undeniably communicative. Most remarkably, on 3 separate occasions, Mafalm led the film crew to spectacular hunting opportunities, not his own hunts, which lions typically conduct with great secrecy, but those of neighboring prides or other predators. It was as if he understood what the humans with their cameras were seeking and deliberately provided it. "It's like he's become a wildlife guide himself," Sophie commented in amazement after Mafalm had led them to a perfectly positioned vantage point to film a cheetah hunt. "I've been filming wildlife for 15 years and I've never seen anything like this. If this incredible display of animal intelligence amazes you, please hit that like button now." The documentary that emerged from this footage, titled The Conscious King, created a sensation when it was released the following year. What had begun as a standard nature documentary became a profound exploration of animal consciousness and the complex relationship between humans and wildlife in the modern world. Viewers around the globe were captivated by the footage of Mafalm's initial desperate search for help, recreated through careful reenactments based on James's detailed accounts, and the extraordinary birth scene where human intervention saved the lioness and her cubs. But it was the subsequent interactions, the apparent gratitude, the deliberate introduction of the cubs, the lion's seeming understanding of the filmmaking process that generated the most intense discussion. Wildlife biologists, animal behaviorists, and cognitive scientists debated the implications. Some dismissed the apparent communication as anthropomorphism, the human tendency to project human-like qualities onto animal behavior. Others saw it as evidence of a level of consciousness in these apex predators that science was only beginning to understand. For James Makori, however, no academic debate could shake what he had experienced firsthand. Over the following 2 years, as Mephalem's cubs grew to young adulthood and the pride expanded its territory, the unusual connection between man and lion continued. The magnificent male never became tame. He remained a wild creature, powerful and free, but he seemed to recognize James as something more than just another human presence in his domain. Rangers rarely remain in one location throughout their careers, typically rotating between different posts to broaden their experience and prevent the emotional attachments that might compromise their judgment and conservation decisions. But James requested and was granted special permission to remain at Amboseli, partly because of his unique relationship with the Mephalem pride, which had become valuable for research purposes. Remember to subscribe if you want more incredible stories about the hidden emotional lives of animals. It was during his 3rd year of observing the pride that James witnessed something that even he, with all his experiences, found difficult to comprehend. The drought that had stressed the ecosystem during the cub's birth had returned with greater severity. Waterholes dried up one by one. The great herds of herbivores thinned, some migrating beyond the park boundaries in desperate search of grazing, others succumbing to thirst and hunger. The predators, including the lions, faced increasingly difficult hunting conditions. James and his fellow rangers worked tirelessly to mitigate the crisis, establishing temporary water points, coordinating with surrounding communities to prevent conflicts as wildlife strayed beyond park boundaries, documenting the ecological impacts for future conservation planning. One scorching afternoon, as James was checking a remote water pump that had been malfunctioning, he spotted a familiar dark-maned figure cresting a ridge about 100 meters away. Mephalem appeared, silhouetted against the harsh blue sky, but something was wrong. The lion's typically proud posture was diminished, his head hanging low, his movements labored. James immediately raised his binoculars. What he saw sent a chill through him despite the blistering heat. Mephalem was injured, badly injured. A deep wound in his side leaked blood that matted his tawny coat. He limped heavily, barely able to support his weight. Without hesitation, James radioed for emergency assistance. "This is Makori. I need Dr. Njeri immediately." Mephalem is severely injured, possibly from a conflict with poachers or an encounter with a buffalo. He's near the North Ridge water point as he waited for the veterinary team. James cautiously approached in his vehicle, expecting the injured lion to retreat or possibly respond aggressively due to his vulnerable state. Instead, Mephalem limped directly toward the Land Rover, his intent unmistakable. He was seeking help again. If this incredible moment of trust is touching your heart, please like and share this story now. When Dr. Njeri arrived 30 minutes later, Mephalem was lying in the shade of James's vehicle. His breathing labored, his magnificent mane dull with dust and blood. The veterinarian assessed the situation quickly. "It's a spear wound," she said grimly, preparing a sedative dart. "Not a buffalo or another lion. Someone did this to him." The knowledge that Mephalem had been attacked by humans, likely poachers encroaching on the park's boundaries or herders protecting their livestock, made the lion's continued trust in James all the more extraordinary, despite being grievously injured by human hands. He had distinguished between threat and ally, seeking out the one human he seemed to trust. The treatment was complex and dangerous. Even sedated, a male lion of Mephalem's size presented significant risks to the medical team. The wound had become infected, requiring extensive cleaning, antibiotic treatment, and careful suturing. Throughout the procedure, James remained close, speaking softly to the sedated lion, his hand occasionally resting gently on the massive mane in a gesture of reassurance that would have been unthinkable with any other wild predator. "He should stay at the rehabilitation center until he's stronger, Doctor," Njeri advised as they finished the treatment. "We can monitor him more effectively there." But James shook his head, knowing with inexplicable certainty what needed to happen. "No. He needs to return to his pride. They depend on him for protection. If we remove him, even temporarily, we risk destabilizing the entire family group." After intense discussion, a compromise was reached. Mephalem would be released back into his territory, but the rangers would maintain round-the-clock observation, ready to intervene again if his condition worsened. It was an unusual protocol, bending numerous wildlife management regulations. But the unique circumstances and Mephalem's undeniable importance as both a research subject and a conservation ambassador through the documentary justified the exception. As the sedative began to wear off, the team retreated to a safe distance. James remained the closest, watching anxiously as the great lion's eyes fluttered open, disoriented at first, then gradually focusing. Mephalem struggled to his feet, swaying slightly, the fresh sutures in his side pulling with the movement. He stood for a long moment, his gaze traveling from the retreating medical team to James, who had not moved. Then, in a gesture that the entire team witnessed, the lion dipped his massive head, the same bow-like movement he had made years earlier after the birth of his cubs. With that, he turned and limped slowly toward the direction of his territory where his family awaited. If this incredible display of animal gratitude moves you, please hit that subscribe button now. The following weeks were tense as James and the ranger team monitored Mafalm's recovery. The infection had been severe, and despite the treatment, there was no guarantee that the lion would survive. Twice more, they were forced to intervene with additional antibiotic treatments, administered through darted medications when it became clear that the infection was persisting. Throughout this period, Mafalm displayed behavior that defied conventional understanding of wild animal responses to human intervention. Rather than becoming wary after the first treatment, he seemed to recognize when he needed additional help. Deliberately making himself visible to the ranger patrols and approaching James's vehicle directly, gradually the magnificent lion began to recover. His wound healed, leaving a prominent scar but no lasting impairment to his movement. He resumed his role as the pride's protector, leading hunts with his now mature offspring and defending their territory against encroaching rival males. The story of Mafalm, the lion who twice sought human help and displayed what could only be described as gratitude, spread far beyond the boundaries of Amboseli National Park. The documentary had already established his reputation, but the spear wound incident, captured partially on film by a tourist in a nearby vehicle, created renewed international interest. Researchers from major universities arrived to study the Mafalm pride, setting up remote cameras and observation posts to document their behavior patterns. Conservation organizations featured the story in fundraising campaigns, using Mafalm's intelligence and the unusual human-wildlife cooperation as evidence of why such creatures deserved protection. For James Makori, however, the experience transcended professional interest or conservation advocacy. His connection with Mafalm had fundamentally altered his understanding of the creatures he had dedicated his life to protecting. What had begun as a standard career in wildlife management had evolved into something approaching a spiritual calling, a profound recognition of the sentience and emotional complexity of the beings with whom humans shared the planet. Don't forget to like and comment if you believe animals are more intelligent and emotional than we often give them credit for. 3 years after this spear wound incident, as the rains returned to Amboseli and the savanna erupted in vibrant green life, James was nearing the end of his daily patrol when he spotted the now familiar silhouette of Mafalm on a distant ridge. The lion's mane had darkened further with age, and he moved with the slight stiffness of early maturity, but he remained an imposing figure against the landscape. James stopped the vehicle, reaching for his binoculars out of habit. Through the lenses, he could see that Mafalm was not alone. Beside him stood a younger male, smaller but with the same distinctive facial markings, one of his sons, now fully grown. And between them, barely visible in the tall grass, tumbled 3 tiny cubs, their spotted infant coats catching the late afternoon sun. A new generation, life continuing in its ancient cycles of birth, growth, and renewal. As if sensing James's observation, Mafalm turned his head toward the distant vehicle, even across that considerable space. The ranger felt the weight of the lion's gaze, a recognition that spanned years and experiences, that had somehow bridged the vast divide between human and wild creature. The lion remained on the ridge for a long moment, silhouetted against the African sky, his family around him, a king surveying his realm. Then, with deliberate movements, he gathered the cubs with a gentle nudge of his massive head and led them down the opposite slope, disappearing into the golden grass of the savanna. James sat motionless in the Land Rover long after they had gone, watching the empty ridge where Africa's most magnificent predator had stood. He thought of all they had shared, the desperate plea for help that defied explanation, the miraculous birth of the cubs, the wound that should have killed him but didn't, and now this moment of quiet introduction, as if Mafalm were proudly presenting his legacy to the human who had played such an unexpected role in his life. If you're moved by this incredible connection between human and wildlife, please hit that like button right now. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the savanna in gold and amber hues, James finally started the engine and turned back toward the ranger station. His mind was filled not with the reports he would need to file or the logistical concerns of park management, but with deeper questions about the nature of consciousness and connection, questions that transcended the boundaries between species. The following months brought new challenges to Amboseli. A well-funded poaching network had begun targeting the park's elephants and lions, using sophisticated equipment and insider information to evade the rangers' patrols. The conservation community was on high alert, with additional security measures implemented throughout the protected area. James found himself working longer hours, his concern for the wildlife under his protection intensified by his personal connection with Mafalm and his family. During this tense period, James continued his regular observations of the pride, documenting their movements and behaviors as they adapted to the changing dynamics of the ecosystem. The 3 new cubs, 2 females and a male, were thriving under the watchful protection of their father and the pride's females. The young adult males, Mafalm's sons from that first difficult birth, had begun to display the restlessness that typically preceded their departure from the natural process that would eventually lead them to establish territories and families of their own. It was during one of these routine monitoring visits that James noticed something unusual. The pride was gathered in their favorite resting place beneath a sprawling acacia tree, but their posture was alert rather than relaxed. Their attention focused on something beyond James's line of sight. Even the cubs, normally playful and carefree, seemed subdued, staying close to their mothers. James raised his binoculars, scanning the surrounding savanna for whatever had disturbed the lions. At first he saw nothing but the usual landscape of grass and scattered trees. Then a flash of movement caught his eye, something metallic reflecting the bright African sun. Remember to subscribe for more incredible wildlife encounters like this. With growing alarm, James adjusted the focus of his binoculars. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. 2 vehicles were positioned at the edge of a distant copse of trees, partially concealed by the foliage. Even from this distance, James could make out the distinctive shape of rifles with telescopic sights, poachers, preparing for a kill. The Mafalm pride, with their magnificent dark-maned leader, would be prime targets. A male lion of Mafalm's size and coloration would fetch an enormous price on the black market, his head and mane as a trophy, his bones for traditional medicines, his skin for decorative rugs. The horror of such a fate befalling this extraordinary creature who had sought human help, who had shown something approaching trust and even gratitude, was unthinkable. James reached for his radio, keeping his voice low and steady despite the urgency pounding in his chest. "This is Makori in Sector 9. I have visual confirmation of armed poachers near the eastern acacia grove. 2 vehicles, at least 4 individuals, heavily armed. They appear to be targeting the Mafalm pride, requesting immediate backup and helicopter support if available." The response was immediate. "Copy that, Makori. All available units responding. ETA 12 minutes for ground team. Helicopter dispatched from headquarters. ETA 20 minutes. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Maintain visual and report any changes in position." James acknowledged the instructions, but a cold dread had settled in his stomach. 12 minutes might be too late. The poachers were already setting up their positions, and if they had spotters elsewhere in the park, a common tactic for these well-organized operations, they likely already knew of the rangers' presence and would accelerate their plans. As if confirming his fears, he saw increased activity around the poachers' vehicles. They were preparing to move, perhaps to a closer position for a clean shot at the lions. James faced an impossible choice: follow protocol and maintain his distance, potentially allowing the poachers to reach their target before backup arrived, or intervene directly at significant personal risk. Before he could decide, something extraordinary happened. Mafalm rose from his resting position beneath the acacia tree, his posture alert but not alarmed. He looked directly at James's vehicle, then in the direction of the concealed poachers. Then, with deliberate movements that conveyed unmistakable intention, he began to gather his pride. If you're on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next, hit that like button now. The lionesses responded immediately to his subtle signals, low grunts and body language that James had learned to read over years of observation. They rose and began herding the cubs, moving not away from the threat as would be expected, but in a direction that would bring them closer to James's position. Mafalm himself remained until the last of his family was in motion. Then followed, his powerful body moving with purpose through the golden grass. The entire pride was approaching James's vehicle, using it as a shield between themselves and the distant poachers. The realization struck James with the force of a physical blow. Mafalme had assessed the situation, had somehow connected the distant vehicles with danger and James's presence with safety. He was deliberately bringing his vulnerable family toward the human he had come to trust, seeking protection in a moment of threat. It defied every conventional understanding of wild animal behavior. It challenged the very foundations of what science believed possible about lion cognition and decision-making. Yet James was witnessing it unfold before his eyes, a wild lion making a complex assessment of relative threats and choosing to align himself with a specific human in a moment of danger. The pride reached James's Land Rover just as the poachers' vehicles began to move, edging out from their concealed position. The line settled in the tall grass beside and behind the vehicle, effectively using it as a barrier. Mafalm himself took up a position directly beside the driver's door. his massive body pressed against the metal as if physically connecting himself to this human ally. James could barely breathe. Through the open window, Mafalm was so close that he could have touched the lion's mane if he had reached out his hand, something he knew better than to attempt, despite their extraordinary connection. The great predator's amber eyes met his, and in that gaze was something James would later struggle to describe to his colleagues, a clarity of understanding, a depth of awareness that transcended the boundaries of species. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more incredible wildlife stories like this one. The radio crackled with updates from the approaching ranger team, but James responded in whispers, acutely aware of the need to maintain calm for the lions pressed against his vehicle. "The Mafalm Pride has positioned themselves around my vehicle for protection," he reported, knowing how incredible it would sound. "They appear to have recognized the threat and are seeking safety here. I can see the poachers advancing. They'll have visual on us within 2 minutes." "Understood," came the tense reply. "Helicopter has visual on the poachers now." Ground Team Ida, 7 minutes. Maintain position. The poachers' vehicles had stopped advancing, presumably upon spotting the Ranger's Land Rover. Through his binoculars, James could see them conferring, clearly reassessing their approach now that they knew a park ranger was present. But they did not retreat, a concerning sign that suggested these were not opportunistic hunters, but hardened professionals who might be willing to eliminate human witnesses. For several tense minutes, a standoff ensued across the savanna. James, alone except for the extraordinary company of the Lion Pride. The poachers, momentarily hesitant but still a deadly threat. The lions remained remarkably calm, the cubs huddled between the lionesses, Mafalm, a vigilant sentinel beside the vehicle. Then the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors broke the silence, growing louder as the aircraft approached from the direction of park headquarters. Almost simultaneously, dust clouds on the horizon signaled the arrival of the ground team, multiple vehicles moving at high speed toward the scene. The poachers broke formation immediately, their vehicles accelerating in opposite directions in a classic evasion pattern. The helicopter pursued the lead vehicle while the ground team split to intercept the second. James remained in position, still surrounded by the Lion Pride, providing updates via radio as the pursuit unfolded across the landscape. It ended within 20 minutes. One poacher vehicle became stuck, attempting to cross a dry riverbed. The other was cornered by the helicopter and ground teams working in coordination. All 5 poachers, professional hunters with connections to an international wildlife trafficking syndicate. It would later emerge, were apprehended without casualties. If you're relieved these poachers were caught, smash that like button and leave a comment. Only when the sounds of the pursuit had faded and the savanna had returned to its natural rhythm did the lions begin to stir from their positions around James's vehicle. The lionesses led the cubs away first, moving in a tight formation toward the safety of a denser patch of woodland. Mafalm remained until last, his position beside the Land Rover unchanged. Before finally following his family, the magnificent lion turned his gaze once more to James. There was something in that look, a connection, an understanding that transcended scientific explanation. Then, with a low rumble that vibrated through the vehicle's metal frame, he turned and padded away, his dark mane catching the late afternoon sun as he disappeared into the grass. When the ranger team returned to debrief James on the successful operation, they found him still sitting in his vehicle, his usual professional composure shaken by the experience he had just shared. "You're not going to believe what happened," he told his colleagues. Knowing the difficulty of conveying the full significance of what he had witnessed, Mafalm brought his entire pride to my vehicle for protection. He recognized the threat from the poachers and made a deliberate decision to seek safety with me. The other rangers exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from skepticism to wonder. Most had heard stories of the unusual bond between James and the dark-maned lion, but this went beyond anything previously documented. "We need to record everything about this incident," said Esther, who had risen to become the park's head of research during the years since the Mafalm story began. "This challenges everything we think we know about lion cognition and their perception of humans." In the days that followed, James meticulously documented every detail of the encounter, the lion's behavior patterns, Mafalm's apparent decision-making process, the positioning of the pride around the vehicle. Research teams conducted additional observations, hoping to gather more evidence of the extraordinary relationship between the ranger and the lion. But something had changed. Whether due to the disruption caused by the poaching attempt or some other factor, the Mafalm Pride became more elusive in the following weeks. They moved their territory deeper into the park, away from the areas where they had been most icily observed. Sightings became rarer, and when they did occur, the lions maintained a greater distance from vehicles, even from James. If you're fascinated by this incredible animal behavior, please hit that subscribe button for more amazing wildlife stories. It's as if they've decided it's safer to keep their distance from all humans now. James said during a research meeting 2 months after the poaching incident. They've learned that a human presence can signal danger as well as safety, or perhaps Mafalem has fulfilled whatever he felt he needed from the connection. Dr. Angeri suggested thoughtfully. The DAF, we can call it that, has been repaid. He sought help when his mate was in danger, and now he has protected his family by seeking your help again. Perhaps the circle is complete in his understanding. The idea resonated with James, though it carried a surprising weight of sadness. The unique window into lion consciousness that had opened through his experiences with Mafalem had changed him profoundly, both as a ranger and as a human being. The thought that it might be closing felt like a personal loss, even as he recognized the rightness of the lions returning fully to their wild nature. 6 months passed with only occasional distant sightings of the pride. The research project continued, but with less direct observation and more reliance on remote cameras and tracking technology. The documentary team returned briefly for follow-up filming, capturing what footage they could of the now elusive lions and conducting extensive interviews with James and the other rangers about the remarkable events they had witnessed. It was during this period that James received news that would take his life in an unexpected direction. The International Conservation Alliance had taken notice of his work with the Mafalem pride and the insights it had provided into lion behavior and cognition. They were establishing a new research center focused on animal intelligence and human-wildlife relationships, and they wanted James to join their leadership team, a significant promotion that would take him away from daily field work but allow him to influence conservation policy at a national and eventually international level. The opportunity was extraordinary, a chance to translate his unique experiences into broader protection for the creatures he had devoted his life to serving. Yet the thought of leaving Amboseli, leaving the possibility, however remote, of further encounters with Mafalem filled him with reluctance. As the date of his decision approached, James found himself driving the familiar routes of the northern sector with increasing frequency, hoping for a final glimpse of the lion who had changed his understanding of the natural world. But the pride remained elusive, as if deliberately avoiding the areas where they might be observed, on his last scheduled patrol before he would need to give his answer to the Conservation Alliance. James took a detour to the acacia grove where he had first encountered the lioness in labor all those years ago. It had become a sort of pilgrimage spot for him, a place to reconnect with the extraordinary series of events that had unfolded from that desperate moment. The grove was quiet in the late afternoon light, the acacias casting long shadows across the golden grass. James parked the Land Rover and sat in silence, absorbing the peace of the savanna and reflecting on the decision before him. Part of him felt that leaving Amboseli would be a betrayal of the connection he had formed here, not just with Mafalem, but with the land itself, with the intricate web of life that had been his daily concern for so many years. If you're touched by this story of connection between humans and wildlife, don't forget to like and subscribe. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, James reluctantly started the engine, prepared to return to the ranger station for the last time as a field officer. He had just begun to turn the vehicle when movement at the edge of the grove caught his attention, a tawny shape moving with purpose through the deepening shadows. His heart quickened as he reached for his binoculars. There, emerging from the grass with the grace that belied his massive size, was Mafalem. The magnificent lion paused at the edge of the clearing, his dark mane catching the last rays of the setting sun, his amber eyes fixed directly on James's vehicle. For a long moment they regarded each other across the space that separated them, man and lion, two conscious beings whose lives had become unexpectedly entwined. Then, with deliberate slowness, Mafalem approached the Land Rover, closing the distance until he stood just meters away. James remained motionless in the driver's seat, barely breathing as the lion circled the vehicle once, his passage so close that his mane briefly brushed against the metal frame. When he completed the circuit, Mafalem sat directly in front of the Land Rover, his gaze leveled with James through the windshield. There was something in that gaze at depth, an awareness that transcended any conventional understanding of animal consciousness. It felt, in that extraordinary moment, like a farewell. "I'm leaving," James said softly, speaking aloud though he knew the lion couldn't understand his words. "I've been offered a position that might help protect more of your kind, but I won't forget you. What you've taught me, what you've shown me is possible. I'll carry that forward into everything I do," as if in response. Mafalem let out a soft rumble, not a roar or a growl, but something gentler, almost like a purr despite his massive size. Then, with a final long look that James would remember for the rest of his life, the lion rose and walked away, disappearing once more into the golden grass of the African savanna. James sat motionless long after Mafalem had gone, watching the spot where the lion had vanished as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. He felt a profound sense of completion, as if the circle that Dr. and Jerry had spoken of had indeed been closed not just for Mafalm but for himself as well. The next day he accepted the position with the International Conservation Alliance. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible wildlife stories that will touch your heart. 5 years later, Dr. James Makori stood at a podium in Nairobi, addressing an international conference on wildlife intelligence and conservation. His work had taken him around the world, studying similar cases of unexpected communication and connection between humans and wild animals, elephants who sought human help when injured, dolphins who collaborated with fishermen, chimpanzees who displayed awareness of human intentions that defied conventional scientific expectations. What these experiences teach us, he told the assembled researchers, policymakers, and conservationists, is that we have only begun to understand the depth of consciousness present in the creatures with whom we share this planet. The boundaries we have constructed between human and animal awareness are far more permeable than we have allowed ourselves to believe. On the screen behind him appeared a photograph, one of the few clear images ever captured of Mafalm looking directly at James's camera, his amber eyes seeming to peer not just at the lens but through it, connecting with the human observer in a way that challenged easy explanation. This lion, James continued, his voice softening with the memory, sought human help not once but twice, first for his mate in distress, later for his own serious injury. He subsequently brought his entire family to a human vehicle for protection when threatened by poachers. These are not the actions of a creature operating on mere instinct. They represent assessment, decision-making, and a form of trust that forces us to reconsider our understanding of animal cognition. The research that had grown from the Mafalm case had led to significant advancements in conservation policy. The recognition of higher cognitive function in lions and other apex predators had strengthened protection efforts, increased penalties for poaching, and expanded the network of protected areas across Kenya and beyond. More profoundly, it had begun to shift the fundamental paradigm of how humans related to the wild creatures with whom they shared the earth, from one of dominion and management to one of respectful coexistence with beings whose inner lives and awareness might be far richer than previously acknowledged. After the conference, as James packed his materials, a young researcher approached him hesitantly. "Dr. Makori, is it true what they say, that you still return to Amboseli every year to look for Mafalm?" James smiled, neither confirming nor denying. The truth was both simpler and more complex than the legends that had grown around his relationship with the lion. Each year, on the anniversary of that first extraordinary encounter, he did indeed take leave from his administrative duties and return to the park, driving the familiar routes in a Land Rover much like his old patrol vehicle. He never expected to see Mafalme again. Lions in the wild rarely lived beyond 15 years, and nearly a decade had passed since their last encounter. If you've enjoyed this incredible true story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing wildlife encounters. Yet each year he found himself drawn back to the acacia grove where it had all begun, where a desperate lion had sought human help against all natural instinct, setting in motion a chain of events that had transformed not only James's life but scientific understanding itself. What he didn't share with the young researcher was what had happened during his most recent visit, just 2 months earlier. He'd been sitting in his vehicle in the familiar grove, watching the setting sun paint the savanna in gold and crimson, when movement had caught his eye, not the tawny shape of a lion, but a group of young rangers in a park vehicle conducting their evening patrol. They had stopped upon seeing him, and the senior officer had approached with respect. "Dr. Makori, it's an honor. We heard you might be visiting." After exchanging pleasantries, the young ranger had hesitated, then said, "Sir, I thought you should know. There's a new pride that established territory near the eastern boundary last year. The male is remarkable and usually large, with a mane so dark it's almost black, and he has a distinctive scar on his right flank." James had felt his heart quicken. "A scar? Like from a spear wound?" The ranger had shaken his head. "No, sir. This one was born with it, a pattern in the fur, almost like a pale streak. But the interesting thing is his behavior. Twice now he's approached our vehicles when we've been observing his pride, not aggressively, almost like he's curious. The researchers say it's unprecedented for a wild-born lion with no history of human habituation." "What do they call him?" James had asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Officially, he's designated M47 in the research database," the ranger had replied. "But the field teams have their own name for him. They call him Mafalme's ghost." James had sat with that information as the young rangers departed, watching the stars emerge above the savanna where he had witnessed something that science still struggled to fully explain. Was it possible? Lions occasionally dispersed over remarkable distances, establishing territories far from their birth's pride. Could this new lion be one of Mafom's descendants? A grandson, perhaps, carrying not just the genetic legacy of that extraordinary lion, but something of his unique relationship with humans? Science would call it anthropomorphism, a projection of human hopes and patterns onto the random occurrences of nature. But James, who had looked into Mafalmi's eyes and seen something that transcended conventional understanding, allowed himself to wonder. As the conference hall emptied around him, James finished gathering his papers, his mind drifting back to the golden savanna and the dark-maned lion who had changed his understanding of what was possible between humans and the wild creatures with whom they shared the world. He had long ago accepted that he might never know the full truth of what had passed between them, what complex awareness had existed behind those amber eyes. What understanding had prompted a wild predator to seek human help not once but multiple times? Perhaps that was as it should be. Some mysteries were meant to remain at the boundaries of human comprehension, reminders of the limitations of science and the continuing wonder of the natural world. What mattered was not complete understanding, but the willingness to recognize the possibility of consciousness and connection beyond the boundaries that humans had constructed. If this story touched your heart and made you see wildlife differently, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who loves animals as much as you do. As James left the conference hall and stepped into the bright Nairobi sunshine, he found himself thinking not of research papers or conservation policies, but of a simple moment, a wild lion sitting before his vehicle, in the golden light of a setting sun. Their gazes meeting across the divide of species in a connection that defied explanation but not understanding. Some debts, he reflected, could never truly be repaid, not between individuals, not between species. But perhaps what had passed between himself and Mafalm had never been about debt at all, but about recognition, two conscious beings acknowledging each other's existence and worth in a world they shared, but experienced in profoundly different ways. And perhaps that recognition, that willingness to see and acknowledge the consciousness in the other, was the most profound conservation tool of all. Thank you for reading this incredible story of connection between humans and wildlife. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with friends who appreciate the wonders of the animal kingdom. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or similar experiences you may have had with wild animals.